So here we go with lesson 1, part 2. But before we get into that, take a moment and find a spot on your notes, on the guided notes, and do these problems here. Now for these problems, something you probably noticed is this expression is identical to, or down here in the answer, is the same as. These phrases, as you can probably tell, mean that you now have equal signs. Okay, so if something is identical to something else, it means it equals that thing. If something is the same as, then it equals it. So in the last PowerPoint, we covered expressions, and we were just translating expressions. Now we're moving into equations, and we're solving equations. So these are the phrases that you can write and translate equations. This bottom one is pretty much a stereotypical word problem. What that means is you'll be seeing a lot of these where it gives you the variables and then tells you what to do with them. So in this one, the total cost of gas is, there's that equal sign language, and then it tells you what to do with them. So the price per gallon times the number of gallons. So P times G. Okay. Your biggest strength when it comes to word problems is just trying to break it down as simply as possible. And sometimes you have to separate the variables out from the equation and the variables out from the word problem and just read the word problem normally. You can often just see how things work. As always, if you have any questions, please make a note and please ask in class. But right now, let's move on to the rest of the PowerPoint. So we have rational numbers and order operations. We're going to finish up with fractions, or at least finish up the groundwork of fractions, and then re-go over order of operations. You've probably been learning both of these things for a long time. That's okay. Please pay attention though. We are going to be covering the basics and making sure we are all on the same page. Now when you're multiplying fractions, multiplying, unlike adding and subtracting, does not need a common denominator. When you're multiplying these, you're going to go across the top, multiply across the top first, and then you're going to multiply across the denominator. Then when you get to the end, you're going to look to see if you can simplify. If you can, great. Simplify it and then box it. If you cannot simplify it, then that's your answer. You can box it and walk away. Now what this bottom point is talking about is that when you have really big numbers, oftentimes it is easier to simplify first and then multiply. So simplifying just means to make smaller. Okay, so make smaller. What it also means is to factor out or to cancel out the LCD, the lowest common, actually the LCF, the lowest common factor. If you can get your numbers to be smaller, then it's easier to multiply or divide. So when we're looking at this problem down here, 25 over 35, those are some bigger numbers. I mean, I can get 4 times 25, but 6 times 35 is just a lot of work. But I can see that 25 over 35, both the top and the bottom have a 5 in common. They're both times 5. You can divide these both by 5 and get a smaller number, which is what the problem did. It divided the top by 5 and the bottom by 5 and got this smaller fraction. I can do 2 times 5 and 3 times 7 in my head, and it gives you the exact same answer. So definitely when you finish the problem, check to see if you can simplify. But if ever you have big numbers, check that first and see if you can make those smaller, and it'll make your math life a little easier. Okay. Here are a couple practice problems. I'm going to do the first 2 with you, and then you will do B and C on your own. Ignore the C. As a reminder again, when you start this, you're going to multiply across the numerator and then the denominator. So 1 times 2, and 4 times 9. Last but not least, you're going to check to see if either one of those can simplify, which it can. So I'm going to divide a 2 from the top I'm going to divide a 2 from the bottom and get 1 over 18. And I wrote this in between step out just so you can see it. I'm not going to require you to show that step. But for right now, so that you can see it, I'm going to be showing you it. Now on to B. Again, we got to deal with that mixed fraction. So 2 times 1, 2, plus 1 is 3 over 2. Multiply across the top, 9 over 10. Now I'm going to check to see if it simplifies. It does not, so this is my answer. Okay, go ahead, the video is going to pause, you do the next two. And these are your answers. Now I'm going to make 2 points about C. The first one, just a reminder, don't forget when you are multiplying a negative times a negative, your answer is going to be positive. The second thing is that if you go from parentheses, and ever you lose those parentheses, do not forget that you are multiplying. So there's a whole lot of symbols that mean multiplication. Parentheses mean multiplication. This little dot right here means multiplication. But if ever you change symbols, don't suddenly start thinking that you're subtracting or that you're adding. Don't confuse the symbols. You are still multiplying even if you lose the parentheses. Okay? Let's move on. Now, reciprocals are two numbers whose product is 1. So if you have, say, in example A down here, a fraction which is 3 over 8, and you flip it, so now I have 8 over 3. When you multiply across, you get 24 over 24. And then when you simplify, that equals a 1. So here you have one number and two numbers that when multiplied together give you 1. These two numbers are reciprocals, which means the answer to this question is 8 over 3. This is my reciprocal for 3 over 8. Okay? Now, before we go on to letter B, a point I also want to make is that whole numbers can also have reciprocals. So let's just say I have 5, the number 5, and I want the reciprocal of 5. Never forget that whole numbers are fractions too. There's always that invisible 1 underneath, which means the reciprocal of this one would be 1 over 5. Okay? You guys go ahead and do B. So in my problem, I turned it into an improper fraction first. It has to be an improper fraction. And then I found my reciprocal, which was 5 over 14. Always make sure if ever you have a proper fraction that you turn it into an improper fraction. Otherwise, it won't work. Now, the reason why reciprocals are so important is when we get into dividing fractions. When you are dividing a fraction, you actually have to multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. If any of you ever heard in middle school the expression keep, change, flip, here it is again. So in this first one, the way it's going to look is you're going to keep 1 over 3, but then you're going to change the sign. You're going to multiply by the reciprocal, which is 2. And I'm going to put the 1 underneath just so that I can see it happening. And of course, this is going to give you 2 over 3. It cannot simplify, so you can leave it like that. Same thing with this other one. 3 over 8 times 3 over 2. I flipped it. Multiply across, and you have 9 over 16. Double check to make sure it can't simplify, and then you're done. Okay, you go ahead and solve these two. They are not written in your notes, so you are going to have to write them down and solve them somewhere on your paper. So in both of these examples, what I did is on one side of the dotted line, you have where I simplified at the end. So on this one and this one, I simplified at the end of the problem. Then on the right side of the dotted line, this is when I simplified at the beginning, as you can see in red. Okay. Now, for right now, since these numbers are pretty small, it almost doesn't matter which one you do. The work is about the same. The reason why I wrote both of them and have them side by side is so that you can see how it works. That way when we get to the bigger numbers, you can know how it works and how I write them down. Okay. As always, if you have any questions about how or what is going on, please let me know, make a note, and ask in class. Before I move on, there are 4 practice problems in the guided notes. Be sure you do those practice problems before class tomorrow, or next time I see you, we will go over them before class. Now let's move on to order of operations. Again, you probably heard this in your middle school classes. That's okay. We're going to go over it again and make sure everyone's on the same page. When we are solving equations, you're going to be hearing words like these. Evaluate. Evaluate means to find the answer. Okay. Simplify means to make smaller. Evaluate means there's going to be an x equals or a y equals or something like that. The way you evaluate is the order of operations. If you want to pause the video and write these steps down, go for it. I'm going to move on, but you do need to make sure you understand, especially these last 2 steps here. I'll talk through it later on in the PowerPoint, but you definitely need to make sure you know those 2. These might be familiar to you, PEMDAS and GEMDAS. Okay, they mean the exact same thing. PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. Every single time, no matter where you are in math, these are the steps you have to go through in order to solve the question right. Always do your parentheses or your grouping first. If there is a parentheses or bracket anywhere in your problem, focus on that first. Exponents or powers are next in line. Okay? Multiplication and division, the biggest thing I want you to remember and to notice is that it goes from left to right. Okay, it doesn't matter where the multiplication or division is in the problem, but let's say you have, x plus y times z plus f divided by k. Okay, just a random letters. It doesn't matter that multiplication is after addition. You would do this first because it is the first multiplication, and then you would go down the line and you would see f divided by k down here and do this second. Okay, so it's from left to right. Same thing with addition and subtraction. Always start from left to right. We do math the way we read. Okay. It might help on some of the more complicated problems just to write this down to give you that physical reminder. Some of these problems are going to get pretty long. They're not hard. You just have to pay attention and make sure you're doing things in the proper order. Let's get started. So in this first one, parentheses. So parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. I don't have any parentheses, but I do have an exponent. Now my biggest suggestion to you would be to rewrite, at least for these first few problems, rewrite each step as you do it. If you think it's tedious, think how I feel. What this does for you and why I even do it when I'm doing problems is it forces you to consider each step one at a time. That way your head doesn't get ahead of your math and you make a simple, silly math error. Okay. Next, I'm going to do my division. So again, I'm going to rewrite the problem. Minus 8 divided by 4 is 2, plus 14. Now subtraction comes first. That's what happens. 14 plus 14. My final answer is 28. Okay? And I know doing it step by step like this is often time consuming. It's no fun. But for right now especially, just do it to get the hang of the different steps. Go ahead and do this next one. When you have parentheses, it is oftentimes a good practice to leave the answer in the parentheses. That way you don't lose the fact that you're multiplying. because you are multiplying. That is an individual step. Okay, let's keep going. Here are two more. Go ahead and do the first one. Now, when it comes to fractions, as the note down here says, you're going to do the numerator first, simplify the whole numerator, then the denominator, and then you'll simplify the fraction as a whole. Okay, that's always how it's going to go. It's always going to be numerator, then denominator, fraction as a whole. There are very few instances where we do something else. So let's get started. So for this one, I got this exponent to deal with first. So my bottom will stay the exact same. And now I have 8, because remember, 2 cubed is 2 times 2 times 2. So 2 cubed is 8 minus 5. Three over the denominator. And now I'm going to simplify my denominator. And then now that I have a number on top and a number on the bottom, I'm going to simplify the whole fraction and end up with 1 over 8. And quite honestly, the red step, that's a really big in-between step. You are more than welcome to go from here to here. But it's always a good idea when you're starting a new concept or when you're reviewing that you show the little in-between steps to remind yourself that they exist. As always, if you have any questions, bring it up in class. Now, evaluating. Evaluating algebraic expressions is a fancy way to say you solved the equation. Okay? When you evaluate, you are usually given an x is equal to something. Whenever you have x is equal to something, you can plug it straight on in. Okay, don't forget, variables are just placeholders. They are placeholders for whatever. I can have x is equal to 3. I can have x is equal to 3y plus 2. Okay, I could even have x is equal to cow. Okay, if your x is equal to a cow, then go for it. Whatever it is, as long as you have x is equal to something, you could take this and you could plug it in to the placeholder. Okay, if it's a cow, that'd be a difficult problem. But it doesn't matter what x is equal to. As long as you have x is equal to something, it can replace the variable in a different problem. Now, for the most part, you right now are going to have x is equal to a number. You won't have any cows. But these two options are definitely coming up in the future. Once you plug it in, it's order of operations until you get a single number. So let's practice. I'm going to do this first one. You're going to do the second one. Here we go. So here are all the different letters and what they equal. The first thing you're always going to do is plug them in. Rewrite the equation with the values in parentheses. The reason why you want to rewrite it with parentheses is so that you don't lose a negative sign. None of these are negatives, but there will be negatives, and you don't want to confuse those or lose a sign. And there we go. Check to make sure all your symbols are in the right place, you didn't lose anything, and now it's PEMDAS all the way down. So first off, you have parentheses. You do the multiplication first on the inside, so really it's this first, and then 5. 2 squared times and then you have to do the exponent. So this happens first. And then multiplications up front. Which gives us 92 divided by 4. And then the answer is just 23. So you go ahead and do the next one. Make sure you plug it in using parentheses, and then use order of operations to solve down. And there you go. With these, it doesn't matter how long the equation is, as long as you take it one step at a time and do one order of operation at a time. It's just basic math you've been doing since middle school. Well, that is it for this PowerPoint. Hope you got everything down. As always, you've heard me say it a dozen times in this one alone. If you have any questions, mention it in class, and then I will see you in class.